She locked the hotel room door behind them on their wedding night. And then she told him she'd been living a lie for 7 years. The woman he had just married didn't even exist. What she confessed next would turn their fairy tale wedding into the beginning of a nightmare he never saw coming. You think you know someone. You think you've found your soulmate. But what happens when you discover that everything, her name, her past, even her smile, was carefully crafted to hide a truth so dark that people have died to keep it buried? This is the story of how he learned that sometimes the perfect bride is running from a perfect hell. Let's go back to where this all started. 3 years ago, Ethan Miller was just another guy in his late 20s, working as a software engineer in Denver, convinced he was destined to be single forever. He knew that feeling of scrolling through dating apps at 2 a.m., wondering if genuine connection even existed anymore. That's where he was when he literally bumped into her at a coffee shop on Larimer Street. He was rushing out with his laptop bag, completely distracted by some work crisis, when he collided with this woman carrying a stack of books. Papers went flying everywhere. He felt like an absolute idiot. But when he looked up to apologize, time stopped. She had these incredible hazel eyes that seemed to hold entire conversations. And when she smiled, not one of those polite customer service smiles, but a real one that reached her eyes, he forgot how to speak for a solid 10 seconds. "I'm so sorry," he stammered, scrambling to collect her scattered papers. "I wasn't watching where I was going." "It's okay," she said, and her voice was soft but confident, musical almost. "Happens to the best of us." Her name was Claire Reynolds. At least that's what she told him. They talked for 2 hours in that coffee shop. She was working on her master's thesis in art history, she said, originally from a small town in Georgia. She moved to Denver for a fresh start. She was intelligent, funny, and had this way of listening, really listening, that made him feel like he was the only person in the world. By the time they exchanged numbers, he was already planning their second date. Some people just fit into your life like they were always meant to be there. That was clear. She loved hiking, just like him. She could discuss everything from classic literature to terrible reality TV with equal enthusiasm. She was kind to waiters, patient with his terrible cooking, and had this laugh that could light up the darkest room. His friends adored her. His mother, who had never approved of any woman he dated, called her a treasure after their first meeting. Even his cynical sister Jake, who usually saw through everyone's BS, pulled him aside after meeting Claire and said, "Ethan, don't screw this up. She's the real deal." For 2.5 years, they built what he thought was the perfect relationship. They traveled together, moved in together, adopted a rescue dog named Buster. She encouraged him when he decided to start his own consulting business. He supported her through finishing her master's degree. She had this way of making ordinary moments feel magical. Sunday mornings, making pancakes, became these sacred rituals. She'd steal his hoodies and look better in them than he ever did. She remembered every small detail, how he liked his coffee, that he got anxious during thunderstorms, that he still missed his grandfather who had passed away when he was 12. But there were little things that didn't quite add up. But love has a way of making you ignore red flags, doesn't it? She never talked about her childhood beyond vague mentions of growing up down south. No funny stories about high school friends or embarrassing family moments that everyone has. When he asked about visiting her hometown, she'd change the subject or say her family was complicated. She didn't have social media, not Facebook, not Instagram, nothing. When he asked about it, she said she valued privacy and preferred real connections over digital ones. It seemed admirable at the time. Sometimes he'd catch her staring out the window with this distant, almost fearful expression. When he'd ask what she was thinking about, she'd snap back to the president and give him that beautiful smile, but there was something fragile behind it. Phone calls would sometimes make her tense. If her phone rang while they were together, she checked the number with this quick, nervous glance before deciding whether to answer. But he was in love. Head over heels, write terrible poetry, can't imagine life without her, in love. So he told himself everyone had secrets, everyone had complicated family situations, and what mattered was the life they were building together. 18 months into their relationship, he knew he wanted to marry her. He spent weeks planning the perfect proposal. Claire had mentioned once, almost offhandedly, that she'd always dreamed of being proposed to somewhere beautiful and natural, away from crowds and cameras. So he planned a hiking trip to Maroon Bells, this breathtaking spot in Aspen. Wife. She said yes before he even finished the question. But here's what he remembered most about that moment. As happy as she looked, as genuine as her tears were, there was something else in her eyes. Relief. Like she'd been holding her breath for months and could finally exhale. At the time, he thought it was just overwhelming emotion. Now he knew it was something else entirely. The wedding planning was interesting. Claire had very specific ideas about everything, but not in a bridezilla way. More like she was following some invisible checklist in her head. She wanted the ceremony to be small, just close family and friends. When he asked about inviting her family, she got quiet for a long moment and said they wouldn't be able to make it. Family complications. But your family is all I need now. She insisted on a Saturday afternoon wedding instead of evening. She wanted the reception to end by 9 p.m. She chose a venue in downtown Denver rather than somewhere more secluded. At the time, these seemed like random preferences, but looking back, he realized she was trying to stay visible, stay in public, stay safe. She planned everything with this meticulous attention to detail that impressed everyone. The flowers, the music, the seating arrangements, all perfect. But sometimes he'd find her staring at the guest list with this anxious expression, like she was trying to memorize every face. 2 weeks before the wedding, she started having nightmares. He'd wake up to find her sitting by the window at 3 a.m., just staring out at the street. When he asked what was wrong, she'd say it was wedding stress and come back to bed. But he started noticing she was checking the locks on their apartment door multiple times before bed. "Are you having second thoughts?" he asked her one night about a week before the wedding. She turned to him with this expression he'd never seen before. Fierce and determined and almost desperate. "Never," she said. "Marrying you is the best decision I've ever made. I need you to know that I love you more than you could possibly understand. Whatever happens, remember that." It was such a strange thing to say. Whatever happens, they were getting married, not going to war. But she kissed him before he could ask what she meant, and he let it go. The wedding day was absolutely perfect. September 15th, clear skies, perfect temperature. Claire looked breathtaking in her dress. Simple, elegant, classic. When she walked down that aisle, he actually teared up because he couldn't believe this incredible woman was choosing him. The ceremony was beautiful. She said her vows with such conviction, such emotion, that there wasn't a dry eye in the place. "I promise to love you, protect you, and never let anything come between us," she said, and her voice only shook slightly on the word protect. They danced their first dance to At Last by Etta James. He whispered in her ear that she was the most beautiful bride who had ever existed, and she held him so tight he could barely breathe. But now he knew she was holding on for dear life. The reception was perfect. Everyone was laughing, dancing, celebrating. Claire seemed more relaxed than she'd been in weeks. She was glowing, social, the center of attention, in the best way. Around 8:30, she came up to him and said she was ready to go to the hotel. They had booked the penthouse suite at the Grand Hyatt downtown for their wedding night before flying to Italy for their honeymoon. They said their goodbyes, took their final photos, and headed to the hotel. In the car, she was quiet, but I thought she was just tired. It had been a long, emotional day. They got to the hotel, took the elevator up to the penthouse. I was making jokes about carrying her over the threshold, feeling like the luckiest man alive. And that's when everything changed. The moment they stepped into that hotel suite, he felt the shift. Claire went from radiant bride to someone he didn't recognize. She walked straight to the door and locked it. Not just the regular lock, the deadbolt and the security chain, too. "Claire," he said, "what's wrong?" She turned around, and the look in her eyes, he'd never forget it. It was terror mixed with determination, like someone about to jump off a cliff. "Ethan," she said, and her voice was completely different, stronger, more serious than he'd ever heard it. "We need to talk." His stomach dropped. He knew that feeling when someone says, "We need to talk," and you immediately think they're about to destroy your world. That's where he was. "On our wedding night?" he tried to joke. "Can't it wait until after the honeymoon?" She shook her head. "It can't wait another minute." She sat down on the edge of the bed and patted the space next to her. When he sat down, he could feel her hands shaking. "Everything I'm about to tell you," she said, "I should have told you years ago, but I was scared and selfish, and I fell in love with you so hard that I convinced myself I could keep running forever." "Keep running from what?" he asked. "From who I really am." And then she told him everything. "My name isn't Claire Reynolds. It's Rebecca Grace Whitmore. I'm from a place called Salvation Creek, Alabama. And until 7 years ago, I was part of a religious community that most people would call a cult." He stared at her. Cult? This elegant, educated woman sitting next to him? "I was born into it. It's called the Eternal Covenant. From the outside, it looks like a peaceful religious community. They have a website, they do charity work, they seem normal. But inside?" She shuddered. "Inside, it's a prison. Women are considered property. We're assigned husbands by the age of 16. We're not allowed to leave the compound without permission. We can't have jobs, can't own money, can't contact the outside world." She stood up and started pacing. "I was supposed to marry Brother Daniel Morrison when I turned 17. He was 43 years old and already had 2 wives. When I tried to refuse, they locked me in the reflection room, basically solitary confinement, for 3 weeks." His mind was reeling. This couldn't be real. This was Claire. His Claire, who had a master's degree and strong opinions about everything from wine to politics. "How did you get out?" he whispered. "I ran." Her voice got smaller. "One night when I was 19, I just ran. I had been planning it for months. I stole money from the community fund, climbed over the fence, and hitchhiked to Birmingham. I was so terrified they'd find me that I stayed awake for 3 days straight." She sat back down, and he could see tears in her eyes. "I spent 2 years just surviving, working cash jobs, sleeping in shelters, always looking over my shoulder. Then I met a woman, Linda, who ran a program for people escaping religious communities. She helped me get a fake ID, a social security number, even a partial scholarship to finish high school." "Claire Reynolds," he said quietly. She nodded. "Linda had a daughter named Claire who died in a car accident when she was 22 years old. She let me borrow her identity, her life. I spent 3 years becoming Claire Reynolds, studying her mannerisms, her interests, her history. I even visited her grave to practice being her." The room felt like it was spinning. The woman he'd married had been living as someone else for 7 years. Everything he knew about her past was a lie. "But the community never stopped looking for me. The Eternal Covenant doesn't let people leave, ever. They have people everywhere, members who've moved to cities, sympathizers, private investigators. They consider runaway wives to be stolen property." She pulled out her phone and showed him a text message. It was from an unknown number sent 3 days before their wedding. Quote, "We know where you are, Rebecca. The wedding photos are beautiful. Brother Daniel is very eager to welcome his wife home." End quote. His blood drained from his face.
"They found you," he said. "They've been watching me for weeks, maybe months." She was crying now. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to get involved in this. I thought I could keep running, thought I could keep you safe, but they know about you now. They know about us." He stood up, trying to process what she was telling him. "So what happens now?" he asked. She looked at him with those beautiful hazel eyes, the same eyes he'd fallen in love with, even if everything else had been a lie. "Now you have a choice," she said. "You can have this marriage annulled. You can walk away from all of this and go back to your normal life. I won't blame you. I should have given you this choice years ago. And if I don't walk away?" She paused. "Then we run together. And we keep running until we find a way to stop them for good." He sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, trying to process everything she'd told him. The woman he'd just married was someone else entirely. Their entire relationship was built on a lie. And now he was being asked to choose between his safe, predictable life and diving headfirst into something that sounded like a thriller movie. "So let me get this straight," he said finally. "You've been running from a cult for 7 years. They've found you, and now they want to drag you back to Alabama to marry some guy who's probably old enough to be your father." She nodded. "And you want me to just, what, pack up our lives and go into hiding?" "I want you to be safe," she said. "If you stay with me, you'll never be safe again. These people don't just give up, Ethan. They have money, connections, resources. They'll make your life hell until you give me back to them." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time he saw past the carefully constructed Claire Reynolds facade to the terrified young woman underneath. "How long have you been expecting this?" he asked. "Every day for 7 years. Every time a car followed me too closely, every time someone looked at me strangely, every time my phone rang from an unknown number. I've been living in constant fear that this day would come." "Is that why you wanted to marry me?" The question came out harsher than he intended, but he had to know. She was quiet for a long moment. "At first," she said, "I thought it might help. Married women are harder to make disappear, but that's not why I said yes to your proposal, Ethan. I said yes because you made me feel like a real person for the first time in my life. You made me believe that Rebecca Grace Whitmore might actually get to be happy." She stood up and walked to the window, looking over the Denver skyline. "You want to know the truth? The whole truth? I fell in love with you the day we met, not because you could protect me, but because when I was with you, I forgot I needed protecting. You made me feel normal, safe, like I deserved good things. But now they've found me, and staying with me means you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. It means we might have to change names, move across the country, start over completely. It means you'll never be able to contact your family again because it might put them in danger." He walked over to where she was standing and turned her around to face him. "Rebecca," he said, using her real name for the first time. "Look at me." She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Do you love me?" he asked. "More than anything."
"Do you want to be with me?" "Yes, but then we figure it out together." The relief that washed over her face was immediate and overwhelming. She collapsed into his arms, and he held her while she sobbed. "Are you sure?" she whispered against his chest. "Because once we make this choice, there's no going back." "I'm sure," he said, and he meant it. "But we're not running anymore. We're going to end this." That night, she told him everything. About the Eternal Covenant, about Brother Daniel, about the other women who tried to escape and been dragged back. She showed him documents Linda had helped her gather, evidence of financial fraud, child marriages, abuse, enough to bring down the whole organization if it ever made it to the right authorities. Linda's been collecting evidence for years, Rebecca said, but she's been too scared to act on it. These people have connections everywhere, local police, judges, even some federal agents. She didn't know who to trust. "What about the FBI?" he asked. She tried once, about 5 years ago.
The agent she contacted happened to be the cousin of one of the Covenant's founding families. Linda barely got out of Alabama alive. They spent their wedding night planning instead of celebrating. They researched federal agencies, journalists, civil rights organizations. They made lists of people who might help them and people who definitely couldn't be trusted. By morning, they had a plan. The next few weeks were like living in a spy movie. They acted normal during the day, went to work, walked the dog, pretended everything was fine, but at night, they were preparing for war. Rebecca reached out to other escapees through underground networks Linda had told her about. He used his tech background to create secure communication channels and help document everything in ways that couldn't be traced back to them. They learned there were dozens of women who'd escaped over the years, scattered across the country, all living under false identities, all terrified of being found. Some had tried to go to the authorities before, but the Covenant's reach was longer than anyone realized. But now they had something they'd never had before: resources, connections, and someone with the technical skills to coordinate a real campaign. 3 weeks after their wedding, they were ready. On a Tuesday morning in October, Rebecca walked into the Denver office of FBI Special Agent Maria Santos with a briefcase full of evidence and a story that would make national headlines within the week. He was waiting in the car outside, their backs packed, ready to run if this went wrong like it had for Linda years before. But Agent Santos was different. She was part of a federal task force specifically focused on trafficking cases, and she'd been looking for a way to investigate the Eternal Covenant for months. We've had reports about this group before, but we could never get anyone to come forward with concrete evidence. Most of the complaints were dismissed by local authorities. Rebecca wasn't just bringing evidence, she was bringing a network. Over the next 48 hours, women started coming forward from across the country. Former members of the Covenant, women who'd escaped and been too scared to speak out. Rebecca had convinced them that this time would be different. Sarah in Portland, who'd been forced to marry her uncle at 15. Jennifer in Phoenix, who'd given birth to 6 children by the time she was 25. Maria in Seattle, who'd been punished for trying to learn to read. One by one, they came forward, and their stories painted a picture of systemic abuse that had been going on for decades. The raid happened on a Thursday morning. Federal agents surrounded the Salvation Creek compound while the entire community was gathered for morning prayers. They had search warrants, arrest warrants, and child protective services on standby. Rebecca and he watched the news coverage from a safe house in Colorado Springs. Seeing those gates, the same gates she'd climbed over 7 years ago, being opened by federal agents was surreal. They arrested 12 people that day, including Brother Daniel Morrison and the entire leadership council. They removed 37 children from the compound, most of whom had never been to school or seen a doctor. But the most important moment came when Agent Santos called Rebecca that evening. "We found the records," she said. "Financial records, marriage certificates, birth certificates that were never filed with the state, everything you told us, and more. This case is going to federal court, and we're going to need you to testify." The trial took 8 months. Rebecca, who legally changed her name back to Rebecca Grace Whitmore, testified for 3 days. She told her story to a packed courtroom facing down the men who'd controlled her entire childhood. Brother Daniel Morrison sat 20 feet away from her the entire time, but she never flinched. "You took 19 years of my life," she said during her victim impact statement. "You made me believe I was property, that I didn't deserve happiness or freedom or love. But you were wrong. I am not your property. I never was." 11 people were convicted on charges ranging from fraud to kidnapping to child abuse. Brother Daniel Morrison was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The Eternal Covenant was officially disbanded, and their assets were seized to help compensate victims and fund programs for religious trafficking survivors. But the real victory was smaller and more personal. Rebecca and he had their second wedding exactly 1 year after their first. This time, it was really her walking down the aisle. No fake name, no false identity, no fear. Just Rebecca Grace Whitmore, survivor and fighter, choosing to marry the man she loved. Linda was there, along with 5 other women Rebecca had helped escape from the covenant. Agent Santos came too, along with her partner and kids. Rebecca's maid of honor was Sarah from Portland, the first woman who'd had the courage to come forward after Rebecca's call. It wasn't a fairy tale ending because real life isn't a fairy tale. Rebecca still has nightmares sometimes. She still checks locks twice and gets nervous around groups of religious people. Some days the weight of what she survived hits her all at once, and he holds her while she cries for the childhood she never got to have. But she's free. Really, truly free for the first time in her life. She finished her master's degree under her real name. She started a nonprofit organization that helps people escape from isolated religious communities. She speaks at conferences and trains law enforcement officers and has saved dozens of people from situations like the one she escaped. 6 months ago, she got a letter from a young woman named Grace. Yes, Grace, like Rebecca's middle name, who'd seen her on the news and found the courage to leave her own abusive community. You showed me that it was possible. You showed me that I deserved better. That letter is framed on Rebecca's office wall, right next to their marriage certificate. The real one this time. People ask him sometimes if he ever regrets it, if he ever wished he'd walked away that night in the hotel room and gone back to his safe, predictable life. The answer is no, never, not for a single second. Because here's what he learned. The perfect bride isn't someone who fits into your idea of perfection. The perfect bride is someone who trusts you enough to show you her scars, who loves you enough to give you the choice to walk away, and who's brave enough to fight for a future worth having. Rebecca Grace Whitmore is the strongest person he's ever met. She's also the kindest, the funniest, and the most beautiful. She's not perfect, nobody is, but she's perfect for him. And that's the thing about real love stories. They're not fairy tales. They're 2 people choosing each other over and over again, even when it's scary, even when it's hard, even when it means facing down the worst parts of your past to build something better. Sometimes the perfect bride is the one who's been running from a perfect hell. And sometimes the greatest love story begins with the courage to stop running and start fighting. That's their story.